In this video, I'm going to chat with Bryant Garvin, who headed up the advertising at Purple Mattress and has spent almost $100 million on YouTube advertising to talk about what it really takes to scale. More on that right after this. Hey, here with Bryant Garvin, partner and head of acquisition at Chamber Media. And Bryant actually used to run all the paid traffic at Purple Mattress. So excited to have you here, man. Thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely, dude. I'm excited to share what I've learned. I'm involved in the community already, right? But I love helping people, I guess, grow and evolve, right? Like that's what this is all about, is growing, evolving, becoming a better marketer, not just a pay-per-click guy, right? Like actually starting to dig into the marketing side of the business, not just a click to conversions. So I'm excited to be here and talk to you, man.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much. And, the topic of our discussion is how do you really scale with YouTube advertising? And the thing that you and I talk about, we always, there's people in these communities that talk about, I'm generating 2-to-1 ROAS or 5-to-1 ROAS with my campaigns. And there's a point where it's like, that's awesome. You have to start there from direct response. You have to be making money in, money out. But to get to the kind of numbers that you've spent on YouTube advertising with some of these brands that you work with, there really has to be a mindset shift. And so what I wanted to do on this, I know you've got some cool stuff put together, but just to kind of talk about where did you start and where are you at now from the YouTube advertising side? How has your mindset shifted to help you scale up the amount that you're spending?
Yeah, so I am a hardcore old school direct response guy. I actually got started 13 plus years ago at Lycos. Almost everybody watching this probably has no clue who Lycos is or what Lycos is, but it was essentially one of the earliest search engines that existed. It had a massive amount of volume until Google came in and slayed them. And I started off as an account executive. So I was like a Google rep, right? And I learned that if I actually understood what was happening and I helped my partners, the clients that I was working with, grow their business and actually impact their revenue, it impacted mine. And so just really got into it and I loved it so much, like learning about all of the processes, all those things, that I just continued to evolve from there. I've worked at a bunch of different ad networks, worked in-house at Choice Hotels. Obviously, I was the first ad buyer there at Purple, built out that processes internally, helped grow them. Second year in business, $196 million in revenue. Like all of that was self-funded, bootstrapped internally, no outside investment. And so that evolution there is something I'm actually probably most proud of, because I'm such a linear guy in some ways that I like to solve problems and starting to understand things a little bit more conceptually. And I think the gift for me was actually starting to understand that all of these numbers you see in the dashboards, all of these numbers you see in your interfaces and Excel files and reporting and all of this stuff, each of those numbers actually corresponds to a human being on the other side of a computer or a phone or a tablet or whatever it is, right? And human beings are nothing if not erratic. And so you need to actually start really understanding the psychology of what people are doing, why they're going to specific platforms, how they're leveraging those platforms in their day-to-day life, and how your marketing needs to fit into that. And notice I didn't say advertising. It has to be marketing. It can't just be buy this, buy this, buy this. That only goes so far, and consumers get sick and tired of it. And it's a lot of fun being able to do that, and then actually be able to start consulting a bunch, run an agency now here, and see the evolution as I'm talking with these brand partners that are growing, right? How they start thinking about things. And once you start getting them, convince them that they're like, okay, we got to stop looking at just what's in the interface, right? Because it's not tracking everything. How do you track cross-spouse relationship, right? Like there's no cross-spouse attribution. Like that doesn't happen. What about the person that comes over to your house and like, man, I really love that jacket that you got on. How the hell do you track that, right? You've got to stop thinking in like these absolutes as if they are absolutes. And that's when you can really start scaling and growing stuff. And that's what I love doing, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. So you told me as we were chatting before the call started about, back in the day, direct response marketing, and you're like, view through conversions, that's for those display guys, right? That's how kind of we all started, like conversion. And so you've gotten the space where you understand the psychology and that people take different paths to conversion. And I think that's just one of the most important things when it comes to scaling up YouTube advertising campaigns is being able to look at where else is this making an impact. And so I would love if you could just kind of share, going from that very hardcore direct response background, what was kind of the first time that you realized, oh, there actually is a halo. I do have to account for this differently. And like that's kind of that point where you break through that spin. Do you remember what that time was like?
So it started right when I went to Purple, because it was a brand new company, right? It hadn't existed previously. Any of the media spend that we were doing was reaching new audiences that hadn't necessarily been impacted before. And we're getting these sales coming in. But as you're looking in the interfaces and the platforms and you're watching what's actually happening, it's saying that we got 10 sales today, but when you look in the back end numbers, we got 30. Well, where the hell did those other 20 come from? Because they didn't come out of thin air. Like, we aren't a brand that's established at this point in time. And so you start thinking a little bit, okay, so I've got to start thinking a little bit differently, because if I'm just optimizing what's in the dashboards and what's being tracked according to Facebook or Google or whatever, I'm actually missing part of my business. And if I'm cutting stuff off at the knee because it's not hitting CPA goals in platform, I could potentially be killing 10, 20, 50, 75% of my business that isn't trackable at this point in time, right? Like, one of the things that, even in Facebook as an example, one of the things people forget is if somebody shares your ad or comments on it and one of their friends sees it, that organic view of your ad doesn't get tracked back to your ad, right? But did your ad influence that? Absolutely. None of that's showing up in the numbers, right? That's where that impression stuff comes from. Yeah, I used to think it was a bunch of sales hogwash. You know, you've got all these display platforms like, hey, but you got to count for view through, like at least a 7-day view through window, man. And I'm like, dude, nobody's checking banner ads and seeing view through 7 days. I'm like, remember that banner ad that I skimmed by while I was reading that article? I'm totally going to go and buy that. And that's why I thought it was bullshit like back in the day. And then you start really digging into it and you're like, okay, yeah, maybe that 3-second view on Facebook doesn't really matter. But a 30-second view on YouTube, that's a little bit different, right? Or even a 15-second view on YouTube with sound, with all of that stuff going on. Like, you just start thinking about how people use the environments that they're in, the platforms that we're advertising on to reach these consumers, and it's different. When you open up Facebook as an example, your whole purpose for going to Facebook is to waste time most of the time, right? You're pulling it out, you're in line at Starbucks, you're scrolling through the newsfeed, you have no clue what's going to come up, first of all, right? So if something catches your fancy while you're scrolling through, you're likely to pause for a little bit. You might even click out because you didn't really know what was coming up next, right? But YouTube is a completely different platform. You go to YouTube for one thing and one thing only, and that's to watch video. So if you're running a TrueView ad, you're interrupting what they went there to go do. And if they happen to like your first 5 seconds enough that they sit through some more of it, they're still going to want to watch the video that they went there for in the first place. So the likelihood of them going and clicking and going and purchasing on your website off of that one ad is minuscule. But what they'll do later is they'll go search for you, right? They'll start reviewing you. They'll start doing all of that research stuff, trying to find other videos on YouTube even about you and seeing what's there. But it's not going to be that one and done stuff that direct response marketers measure everything by, right? And I think that's the big difference, is understanding how people are using the platforms and how you can truly leverage them to influence people. Because that's what our jobs are as marketers, is to influence them to want to interact with us. It's not trying to get them, force them down their throat, right? Like, those brands that do that, there's only so far they can grow. You and I were talking about that a little bit, right? Like, direct response, you got to start. You got to have some money coming in order to keep having money go out, right? But that only goes so far. You will always hit a ceiling, and every brand will be a different ceiling, right? Depending on their product, the size of market, all of those things. But there is going to be a hard ceiling, and you have to start going beyond that and stop looking at just what's being tracked there and start thinking, hey, I invested. And stop looking at ad spend as ad spend. It's an investment, right? You're putting money in, and that's actually making you more money than you put in, right? So if you invest $1,000 today, did I have at least $3,000 come into my business because of that? Awesome, cool. I don't really give a damn how I got there, right? Like, I made money. yeah, cool. I attract $1,000 in ad investment and $1,000 in revenue directly back to my ads. Okay, so I at least broke even directly there. But that extra 2,000, I'm not sure how it really got there, but do you really care at the end of the day? If you have more money in your bank account, do you really care if you can precisely answer how every single one of those sales got
I know. But
there?
I'm with you. I just had this conversation. I ran a campaign last week that we were scaling a target CPA campaign. Spent $18,000 on Saturday. And we're like, cool, we'll keep pushing the envelope. And so this was still profitable inside the dashboard for me. But on Sunday, we spent $28,000. And so it was one of those things where I was like, okay, well, we've gone past our point of profitability, kind of my break-even line. And we talked about the ceiling that you just talked about. It's $22,000. I'm going to spend more than that on a single day. I'm not going to see the returns inside of the account. And so I basically went to the brand and said, hey, do you want us to keep spending and drive more halo for you? Or are you going to hold us to the click-throughs and we can only like 22,000 is the most we're ever going to be able to spend in a day? And that was that conversation for them where they're like, well, I have to have a different mindset. And I think that's kind of what we're talking right now, right? Is having that different mindset. So from a marketing perspective, we're talking about scaling up anything on YouTube. Before we get into the technical stuff, you have a wicked cool slide that I'm really excited for you to show people. But before we get into that, from the mindset perspective, whether it be your business or someone else's business, how have you kind of handled, like, I always talk about taking baby steps. You and I have talked about like minimum viable products. I always talk about isolation experiments. So basically like create a fake brand and drive YouTube ads and see what the performance is to the second website, little things like that. Do you have any like little tactics or ways that you kind of help people become more comfortable with this concept of seeing outside the dashboard?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a lot of the brands that we work with, obviously video is a core of what we do. Like I'm really passionate about video. And I've done everything from geo tests, right? Where you're like running just in specific geographies and not anywhere else and seeing what the differential and lift is on those. And you know, you've got 5 different geos and one's 40% lift, one's 60, one's 140. And you're like, okay, well, what does that tell me about the whole thing? I don't know. It depends on the geo, right? Like there's a lift. I just can't quantify 100% what it's going to be overall, right?
Yep.
And so those, like doing all of those things, any of those things that you're doing where you're doing isolation tests, that's how old school did everything. Like that's how TV did stuff back in the day and radio and all of these things. It is like going way back to the roots of how the madmen were running stuff back in the day, right? But it's still not an absolute answer. It's a directional answer. And I think that's the biggest thing is when you're doing any of these tests, you need to not be looking for an absolute, this is exactly what I'm going to get out of this if I do this. It's more, hey, directionally, is this going to make my business more money and revenue, more customers, or is it not really going to move the needle at all? And those are the big things. And I think it's a lot easier. So many people, like I am a really firm believer in making sure that you are not just in one channel. If you are on just one advertising channel, your business will eventually die on the vine because something will happen. I don't care how legit you are, I don't care what type of brand you have. If you only have one like fire hose of revenue coming in, eventually it's going to die. And so you've got to diversify. But if you go out right out the gate and you try and do 20 different things, you have no idea. Like, yeah, you can track the stuff in platform, but you don't really know what's moving the needle overall. And so I generally start with 1 or 2 channels at a time and continue to grow those. If I'm making big shifts in budget or spend, I'm doing it in one place at a time so that increase is more noticeable. One of the big things that you brought up, just really that I think is really funny. You're talking about, hey, if we spend $18,000 in a day, we're good. Bump it to 28, we're not. 22 is our cap. But even in that instance, you're talking about in day, right? Like even that is a big shift that if you want to start growing your businesses and break through that ceiling and really be, if you want to grow, like if you're an e-commerce brand as an example, and you want to build a brand and a business, you're going to have to stop looking at, hey, I got this many clicks and conversions and spent this much today.
Right.
Oh, today sucked. Oh, I've got to pull back everything, right? Because that's forgetting how consumers interact, especially if you're introducing people to something that's new or different. It's going to take a little bit of time for them to truly get it. Even if they are excited about it, they're going to have to do a little bit of research, right? And that's a huge thing. I think that also is where I really started shifting a lot of my stuff. Like I started doing longer view through windows on my YouTube advertising, right? I would do a 90-day click and a 30-day view just to try and get as much data as possible. No, I'm not saying, yes, that's exactly what happened. But if I don't have the data, I can't optimize off of it, right? I have nothing directionally to know where to go, what to do, any of that stuff. And so that's the mind shift that we start having with partners. We have one that we work with here at Chamber Media. It's a do-it-yourself install air conditioning unit. About as complicated as you can get, right? It takes over 7 hours to install this thing. It's like a $2,500 unit, which is significantly cheaper than the normal one, but it's a self-install type of thing, right? So we created these awesome videos, did all of this stuff, and their first year, they went from 10 million to 26 in 1 year, right? This year, they've actually expanded into more Amazon, more retail like Lowe's and Home Depot and other places like that. And the directly tracked ROAS that I'm getting is like a 2-to-1. Like it's actually a 1-to-1 directly tracked. It's a 2-to-1 in their e-commerce store. If I'm looking at like how much we're investing versus how many dollars are coming in there. And if that was all I was focused on and I started pulling back on advertising, we would actually be impacting the business negatively because the overall business as a whole is up 75% over last year. Wow. Like those aren't growth numbers you get by focusing on just what's in there. You have to start looking at things a little bit more holistically and understand that the marketing that we're doing is the marketing they're doing, right? These YouTube advertising, these Facebook advertising, they're not running TV, they're not doing any of that stuff. They probably will eventually, but right now, this is driving their whole business.
Totally. And I think the important thing to really understand for anyone who's listening, the reason that I have hard caps is because I run like an affiliate, so I don't get credit for branded search, those types of things. That being said, if you're running an agency or if it's your own business, especially though if you're running an agency, the big difference between being a decent YouTube advertiser and getting to Bryant's level is literally the conversation that we're having right now. You have to be able to take a step back and say, look, I'm a partner. Like we're partners. You talk about Chamber, you guys refer to your clients as partners. You're working together and you have to be able to have intellectual conversations that are not 100% spreadsheet, right? It's a conceptual piece of saying, look, if I pull back on this advertising, it's going to affect your retail. It's going to affect your Amazon. It's going to affect all these other pieces. And so if you ever want to get to the point where you're spending $50 million a year on YouTube advertising, you have to be able to communicate to someone and say, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put together a test to be able to see the impact of this on your overall business. Maybe we're looking at a geo, maybe we're looking at an age group, like whatever those things are, but putting together those isolated tests to show movement, like you said, one step at a time. That's how you get from, running $20,000, $30,000 of YouTube ads a month to running $20,000 or $30,000 a day, is by being able to communicate that this is about more than just the clicks inside the dashboard. I think that's so important for people to understand.
And from isolation tests, one of my favorite actually is to just stop everything. Like it scares the shit out of people, which is part of the reason why I like doing it. Because I'm like, well, here's the deal. I'm fine with stopping everything. Like I know what it's doing, but if we want to measure the impact on the business, let's just stop it. And let's see what happens over the next couple of weeks. And it usually lasts a couple of days.
Yep.
Like, okay, turn it back on.
Yep.
Okay, you're fine. Like, so sometimes that, which especially if you're in an agency, you're like, oh, I'm cutting spend. That means I'm not getting that commission or that fee or whatever, however you're structuring your stuff, right? But at the end of the day, if you are confident in what you're doing and what it's doing for the partner, they're going to realize it pretty quickly, right? When all of a sudden your brand search volume just starts dropping and they're like, well, why is brand search worse? Well, remember we turned off YouTube a week ago? Like it's an amazing, that is my favorite isolation test of all time actually, is to just completely cold turkey something. I've even done it with branded search, right? Like at Purple, my CMO was like, if they're searching for us, they want us, they already know who we are, blah, blah, blah. Even though every competitor under the sun is bidding against us aggressively, like I've never paid more for brand search than I did at Purple. And that was because non-brand search was like $40 to $80 a click. So they're like, shoot, if I could pay $40 a click as a competitor on somebody else's, I'll take it. And we were the one that was driving all of that brand volume. Our brand volume, there came a point in time when we were driving brand search volume than some of the key non-branded terms in market. Like, and all of that, like that doesn't happen overnight, first of all, but it's like, what do we do with that?
Yep.
And I had done tests where I had thrown in a bunch of people, like I had done RLSA audiences in AdWords where I was like, okay, this ad group is everybody that's been to my website. This ad group is nobody that's been to my website. 85% of all of my traffic was coming from people that had never been to my website. Like, how the hell did they decide to search for Purple Mattress, right? That's not a brand search term that existed before. So like, and that wasn't enough. So I'm like, all right, here's what we'll do. We're just going to turn it off.
Yep.
Like, yeah, let's do that. And a week later, it was right back on. So like, you've got to have that. And it comes from experience, right? But you've got to develop that confidence in yourself and in what you're doing and be able to explain that to people. There are very few people that do not take what I say at face value because that confidence comes through, right? Like they know I know what I'm talking about, even if they can't see every minuscule thing. And the ones that can't see every minuscule point and can't figure it out and can't let go a little bit, those are the brands that don't grow. They hit that ceiling and they stay there. They can't get out of that direct response mindset and it kills their business growth. And eventually, if you kill your business growth, you kill your business. Because that ceiling, it's not like you stay there forever. Because there's somebody that's going to come up behind you and pass you. And they're going to start eating into your market share. And all of a sudden, one day you're going to find yourself like, dang, I should have sold 2 years ago when I was making good money. Because you didn't have the right mindset.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, thank you so much for explaining the mindset piece. I think that's huge. Now, the other piece, though, is you do have, I'll call that when we talk about directional accuracy, we want to make sure that we're moving directionally. The mindset piece is the most important. But let's say you want to get in, you know, one thing that you're really big on is the creative side, understanding which creatives are working best with a particular audience. So now let's say, how do you use the tools? I kind of think of the tools inside of our dashboard like a cockpit in a, you know, when a person's flying. Like they know they can see out the window where they're headed. They don't only depend on their tools. They just use them to kind of keep them on the right path. So you have a pretty cool slide that you've put together that shows kind of how you structure your accounts and really the way that you look and judge how things are working relative to one another. You want to kind of dig into that from the technical side?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me know if that's showing up for you there.
Yep, that's good.
All right. So I literally just happened to get this finally put together today with one of my designers, so it worked out well. But the way that I think about the way I set up my accounts even and how I'm separating out my prospecting, my top of funnel, those cold audiences, however you want to refer to them, versus those other ones that are a little bit more direct response, brand search, shopping, even remarketing campaigns and stuff like that is very different. And part of the reason why, and I'm going to show this here, it's because Google has a cross-channel attribution problem, okay? Anybody that's watching this video, go into your Google account, click on your conversions, go down to edit the settings, and then drop into the attribution section there, okay? When you drop in there, pay attention to the far little right-hand side fine print where it says attribution only applies to Google search and shopping on google.com. Search Partners isn't involved in that. Display isn't involved in that. YouTube isn't involved in that. Only search and shopping on google.com. Okay. So if you go back to thinking about how somebody interacts with you on YouTube, right? They went there to watch the video after your ad. So if you make a big enough impact on them that they're interested in your brand, like your product, want to research you more, what's their next step? They go to Google and search. Well, if you have your top of funnel YouTube and your main search account and your brand search there, and they go video view to YouTube or to brand search, and that brand search gets 100% of the credit. Now your YouTube, first off, looks like it did nothing, right? Which, okay, going back to everything we talked about, that's not the most important thing, but you have no data to actually directionally optimize off of stuff. Like everybody talks about attribution, and there is no hard absolute attribution that exists because there's so many unknowns. But one of the things that's really interesting is I look at attribution as directional, right? So I actually set up a manager account for each of our brand partners. In one of them, you're going to run all of your non-brand brand search because all of that's getting some, attribution depending on what you got there. I'll run my shopping in there, my display remarketing. I'll even run my YouTube video viewer for the people that have been to my website and video view remarketing stuff, right? I'm doing all of that inside of that account, and it has a separate conversion pixel. This is a really big key. Your main brand search account has to have a separate conversion pixel from the second account we're going to set up under our manager account, which is a top of funnel YouTube and display prospecting. A lot of people don't do a lot of display prospecting. I know you guys teach a lot about that, and I think it's highly underutilized, but YouTube is my favorite platform of all time because of so many reasons. But what you do at the top of funnel one is you set up a separate conversion pixel. So you now have two conversion pixels firing on the same events. But Bryant, now I'm double counting. Why, yes, you are. But you don't care because you're not saying I made double the revenue because you're looking on the back end and seeing exactly how much revenue you made. But what this is doing is it's actually giving data. First off, if you're using TCPA, if you're using any of these algorithmic bidding that is now inside of Google, it actually is providing enough data that it might be able to actually do something with it. But beyond that, you're able to actually start seeing conversion data, not just at an account level, but at a campaign, ad group, ad level, and against specific audiences, right? So now you can actually start doing what marketers do, which is testing what creative works best with which audiences. And now you've actually got data sitting there to say, yes, this creative works better with these audiences. One of the things I would do is at Purple, as an example, is we would launch new videos, which we're constantly doing, right? I always would launch the new video to the same exact audience. Like they were always the same audiences because I'm isolating what I'm testing, right? It would be like basically a broad 18 to 45 US audience. That was it. That was the only thing I would target, right? I wanted to see how much traction I could get in as broad of an audience as possible. And then I would go down. On the flip side, when I was testing new audiences that I had never tested before, I would always test them with one of my tried and true creatives, like the Goldilocks video as an example, because then I'm testing the audience, not the creative, right? And so isolating what you're testing is a big part of it as well. You want to make sure that you're not skewing anything potentially, because if you're testing a new video and you want to make sure that it's going to work really well, but you test it in a couple of different niche audiences, it might work in one, might not work in another, but you're testing the audiences more than you are the creative. And so you've got to start isolating how you're doing things so that you're testing creative for the creative sake, because creative needs to be able to kind of stand on its own, and then testing which audiences with that creative work really well. And then once you get all of this set up, you've got your brand search stuff going, you've got all your marketing, you've got your top of funnel stuff, all of a sudden you can start seeing which creatives and which audiences are working better than which creatives and which audiences. And that's all it's about. It's about giving you some data, directional data to understand. And then you can start even digging in a little bit more to the psychology. Why does this work better with this audience? Oh, and you start thinking, like you got to start putting on your thinking cap, right? And thinking a little bit about the human again on the other side of it instead of just looking at the numbers. Well, what that can allow you to do is actually to start thinking, oh, well, maybe if I tested this creative, a new creative, right? Or twisted this, maybe it would work a little bit better for this audience, or maybe I could get some more creative going in there. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's that piece. What inside of what we teach a lot of is utilizing the existing Google Analytics data you have to kind of find your best possible options right off the bat. So your affinity, your in-market audiences, your demographics based on your existing conversion data, you're testing your creative against it. And then once you find your, like you said, your tried and true, I call them our workhorse ads. Those are the ones we start to test against the different audiences, figure out which are working best. And if they're not working, can we try a different creative? So totally on the same page there. One thing that we talked about before we got into this is when you were talking about how well is it working, you talked about utilizing the all conversions and the ROAS. Can you just kind of talk about why you're doing that? Because it comes down to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two reasons actually. So when you're looking at conversions in your account, like the conversions column, which is the default conversion column that's inside of AdWords, that is only including click-through conversions. If you're doing search, display, YouTube, that type of stuff, it does not include view-through or cross-device or cross browser. So all conversions actually includes view-through, cross-device, and cross-browser. Well, if you start thinking about consumer behavior, right, you start understanding, again, they're probably going to view my ads, not click on them. They may not even view a full 30 seconds, but I want, like, if they view 20, is that an impact, right? Like, what impact is that having? If they change devices, if they change browsers, you want to start tracking all of those things. And what happens is when you start doing that, first of all, TCPA, all of your like algorithmic bidding only works off of the conversions column, okay? So it's not going to affect any of that. But what this is going to do is it's going to start directionally affecting what you're doing. Because then you can start saying, oh, hey, this one's showing a hell of a lot more conversions of people that viewed it, that went cross-device, whatever it is. The ROAS on this is significantly different than if I was just tracking on the conversion side. And there are some creatives and audiences that work okay on the conversion side. And then there are some that when you start getting into that new mindset, that you realize almost all of that stuff is coming through, not in a click conversion basis. You've got to start thinking about the platform that way, because if you keep those things that mostly are driving view through cross-device type of conversions, you could essentially be killing the whole entire flow of new blood into your family, into your product, into your company. And that's really why it's so important to focus in on those view through conversions, because again, it's all about consuming content on YouTube. It's not about going to find something to click on and buy or waste your time. It's about viewing content. And if they are engaging with your brand, right? Like if somebody engages with your brand for 30 seconds, like a lot of people's time on site isn't even 30 seconds or is barely above that, right? And they're just reading text and seeing a few images. But when you think about the medium that is the most impactful, it's video, because it includes visual, it includes sound, it includes all of these demonstrations, all of these different pieces, right? And YouTube has all of that. Could you imagine watching Avengers Endgame without sound?
No.
Right? But yet that's what we're doing on Facebook when we're running a video ad. We're running these ads with burnt in subtitles, which works because of the way that they're using the platform, but it's not going to make as big of an impact. Okay. One of the things that I read in the last couple of years, it's a book called How Customers Think. It's by Gerald Zaltman. He's a Harvard business professor. It was written, I think, 15 or 20 years ago. And he talks about, if you boil the whole entire book down, essentially that 95% of every single decision that we make is made unconsciously or subconsciously, including purchase decisions. We decide what we're going to buy before we even know we're going to buy it. And then we go research it. And then we go ask our friends. And then we put it out on social. And then we find a reason to validate that emotion that we had that we wanted to buy those things, right? Emotion drives the subconscious. So video is the quickest way to tap into that emotion and create that connection that is not just going to be, hey, that's a cool product, but man, I'm excited about this, right? Like that seems like a cool brand. Wow, that made me feel good, right? That's the power of video. And that's why it's really important to focus in on those view throughs, on those types of things, that all conversion area, because that's what you're doing is you're impacting the subconscious when you're doing video right. And that's going to lead to everything else. And if you ignore that, you might as well not run video. I'll be completely blown.
Totally. No, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. I think this is this piece of, a lot of people are always asking, well, how do I get to these crazy numbers a day? And, I think you and I can both agree it's not easy, but it's simple.
It's not.
But it's simple, right? It's a simple thing.
Is.
Like you have to look outside of the dashboard. You have to start looking at the bigger picture. And then you have to be testing creatives and understanding, media buying is targeting people with the right, persona of what you're going after. and then putting the right message in front of them. And if you want to make it more complicated than that, you can. But you and I just talked about before we got on this call, a lot of people like to make everything super complicated. Start with something simple. It's not easy. Once again, we'll repeat, not easy, but scaling up is something that does not require, a degree in nuclear physics. You just have to understand that there's other places outside the dashboard that conversions happen. Use the dashboard to give you directional accuracy, and you go from there.
Yep, you use the dashboards to give you directional accuracy within platform, help you understand where you should be investing your dollars, cents, and times on optimizations, on killing things, on starting new things. But you're not using that as an absolute for your overall business. You're actually looking at a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis on how many dollars you're investing into media versus how many dollars are coming in. Obviously, you got to figure out your cost of goods, all of that stuff, right? But it's an absolute investment in, investment out, right? Like, what is dollars in, dollars out on a macro level instead of the micro level, which so many direct response media buyers get so focused on, is that micro level. Oh my gosh, this one ad in this ad set targeting that 1% lookalike audience, and like that ad is killing it. And that one over there is not, right? Like, okay, yeah, directionally within the platform, that's great. But like, if you put all of your dollars in just that one ad set, first of all, there's limited scale. Depends on which optimization tactics you use and all of that, right? But you've got, it really does boil down to as simple as how many dollars do you have going out? How many dollars do you have coming in? Is that sustainable? Is that going to help you get to where you want to go? And the faster you want to grow, this is a really important point, I think, as well, which a lot of people overlook, is the faster you want to grow, the less profitable you are going to be. I'm not saying that you won't make money, but you literally, they're inverse, right? Profitability and growth are inverse lines if you're looking at it on a chart. And the faster you want to grow, the less profit you're going to have. And the more profit you want to have, the slower your growth is going to be. And so you have to make a strategic decision. If you're an agency with your partners, how fast they want to grow. Like, that is one of the questions you should be asking them. Hey, I'm all for growing you, but how fast do you want to grow? Because we've got to trade something. You can't have everything. That would be amazing. I'm not the genie in the lamp. I can't give it to you all, right? So which one would you rather have? And just because we choose one this month doesn't mean we can't change it next month, right? But like, I need to know where I'm heading and where I'm going. And if it's your business, you need to decide what you want. Do you want a lifestyle business that's just bringing in money every single month and it's chill and it's relaxed and whatever? Or do you want to grow a brand? Do you want to grow and be out there and be known and be that type of person, right? I think that is also, it goes back to strategy. And it's not even just marketing strategy, it's business strategy. And so even if we're marketers, we're media buyers, all of this stuff, you've got to understand a little bit of the business economics on the back end in order to truly be able to talk to people and help them understand what you're doing to help their business.
Completely makes sense. That all out of all the advice you've given, all of it's been great, but I think that was one that just hit home. I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
Have you ever spent, like, upped your budgets and ever seen your prices go down?
Yes.
You have. Okay. It's a very interesting topic because I think a lot of people, when they get to scale, they're like, oh, my cost, maybe it's a 85-cent click. And then all of a sudden they move their budget, they 10X it. I've never seen my costs go down. I've always seen them go up. That's a part of scaling. But I would love to hear what you're doing to make that happen.
So first of all, it's very rare. But I also think that if you're talking about a specific audience, specific ad set, ad group, and a specific video, and just scaling that one thing, yes, it probably 99% of the time it's going to increase your costs. But there's more than one way to scale. And I think that's the big thing. Almost everybody just thinks, oh, I'm going to up my budgets on this ad that's working. Well, you've got to remember that your audience size is only so big. And even out of that audience size, even if it's perfect, right, they exactly match who you are, there's only so many of them that are in market today, right? And so if you want to continue to scale, you need to continue to look outside of that. That's why you always, I have a rule where at least 10% of all of my media budgets are going to testing something that could completely fail. Because if you're not investing in testing something that will not return a dime to you potentially, you're never going to find that next gold mine. You're never going to find that next audience that could scale to the moon. And so if you're constantly doing that little bit of testing on the back end, when you want to scale, you've got some audiences already lined up there that you can start pouring more money into. You can pour more fuel on those fires, right? You've got multiple horses, whatever analogy you want to use, right? Like you've got more there to be able to leverage and use.
And I think that's a great point. And I think that's the piece is if people just think about increasing their budget, I've never seen that go down. That's why a big thing that we talk about is building in additional audiences, additional targeting with smaller budgets that you're testing, but you can find profit wins there. And like you said, profit and scale don't really go together. And so it's that piece of finding how can you build an account that has a workhorse campaign driving a ton of customers, but then also these campaigns down here that these may be more profitable. They're not driving as many as long as the overall your ad spend is lower than your return. I just think that's that piece that's so hard for people to understand sometimes. They want this big, sexy spend number, but they're not thinking about your costs go up when you do that. And so I just...
And the back end economics, right? You've got to make sure that the back end economics work. So in my accounts, as an example, one of the ad groups, targeting options, whatever on YouTube, that 9 times out of 10 just absolutely kills it is placement targeting, right? But it is really hard to scale that the same way because you are targeting explicit videos, right? Whereas audience targeting, you don't give a damn so much about which video they're watching, you care more about the person. So the placement targeting, I've got some campaigns that I'm getting like a 40x return on ad spend directly tracked in platform, right? And I can spend $500 a day. And I'm like, all right, well, that's where it is. Go out, try and find a few more placements, right? Test a few more things, but that's the limit there. That's the one that's driving good value, but it's not going to scale to the moon. The ones that scale to the moons are the audience-based ones. They're massive custom intent audiences that you build out. And I think that's probably one of my favorite reasons why YouTube works is because it is the only platform in the world that has access to literal search data. People that just search for your competitor, as an example, or a non-branded keyword that you may be paying $10 a click for on search, you can hit them up immediately with YouTube ad and pay 5 cents for them to engage with it for 30 seconds. And if you just search for something and you saw an ad on YouTube that was related to what you just searched for, first off, it's a little creepy. Secondly, though, you pay attention. So like, it's so freaking awesome. There's just, dude, I can talk YouTube for days. You and I have. So like, I love it.
Well, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much. This was really big. You know, the most important thing for me is helping people understand how to scale. And it's not really about the technical stuff. It's about the mindset, having the right discussions, understanding the goals. So thank you for reinforcing and expanding upon what I always try to talk about. I just think this is so awesome to have someone that spent the numbers that you've spent, be able to come in and talk about, it's not about being, the best, the smartest guy in the room. It's about being able to set the expectations, make sure you're making good decisions based on the data that you have. That was amazing. So thanks so much for sharing your time and your knowledge, man.
Absolutely. Anytime, man.
Awesome. Great to see you. Have a good one. Chat soon.
Peace.
Thanks, Brett. If you found this tutorial helpful, make sure you click on the subscribe button on the screen right now. Also, if you'd like to join the Daily Edge and get the daily dose of what's working in paid traffic and tracking, you can text Daily Edge to 44222.